The gun was cold in Jack Reeves' hand. He hadn't touched one in 5 years, hadn't wanted to, but the three men standing between him and the stairwell left him no choice. The warehouse stretched around him like the skeleton of some industrial beast, 3 stories of steel beams and shattered skylights, moonlight cutting through the darkness in pale ribbons. 40 feet below, the men moved in tactical formation, boots silent on concrete suppressors already threaded onto their weapons. Professional spacing, military cadence. These weren't security guards pulling overtime. These were hunters. His phone vibrated against his thigh. The message from Sarah burned into his retinas. They took Emma. 10 minutes. Jack looked at the fire axe mounted in the emergency station beside him. Red paint flaking, blade dulled by years of neglect. Not ideal, but he'd survived Coruscant with less. He stepped to the edge of the catwalk, letting his boots scrape against metal. The sound echoed through the empty space like a gunshot. 3 heads snapped upward. 3 weapons rose in unison. "You have 10 seconds to leave." His voice carried no urgency, no fear. Just the flat calm of a man who had made peace with violence long ago. "Before this gets unfortunate for all of us." The lead man laughed, teeth white in the darkness. "One unarmed maintenance worker against 3 of us." Jack pulled the fire axe from its housing, the weight settling into his palm like greeting an old friend. "Who said I was unarmed?" 24 hours earlier, the world had been simpler. The morning shift at Morgan Industries warehouse began at 5:30, when the Portland sky still hung gray and heavy with the promise of rain. Jack pushed his cart through the loading bay Navy coveralls, bearing his name in faded embroidery, invisible to the executives who occasionally wandered through on inspection tours. That was the point. Invisible meant safe. Invisible meant forgotten. His boots moved without sound across the concrete floor, a habit he couldn't break even after half a decade away from combat. Eyes swept corners before he turned them. Ears cataloged every distant slam of metal, every footstep within 50 yards. The body remembered what the mind tried to forget. Miguel Hernandez struggled with a shipping crate near Dock 7, the 60-year-old's back, bent at an angle that promised pain later. Jack was beside him before the older man could strain further, lifting the weight as though it contained nothing but air. "You're going to hurt yourself." The words came out softer than Jack intended. Miguel's weathered face creased with gratitude. 3 years you've been here, Jack. Never once seen you complain. Never once seen you struggle." His eyes held the knowing look of someone who recognized capability when he saw it. "What were you before this?" Jack set the crate on the dolly, already turning away. "Someone else." And the security camera in the corner tracked his movement. He adjusted his path by 2 degrees, staying at the edge of its range. Old habits, the kind that kept men alive in places where survival was measured in seconds rather than years. His apartment occupied the 3rd floor of a building that should have been condemned during the last administration. The elevator hadn't worked since before he moved in. The heating system operated on what seemed to be pure spite, choosing the coldest nights to surrender completely. But the rent fell within his budget, and the neighbors asked no questions about the man who kept unusual hours and spoke to almost no one. The studio measured roughly 400 square feet of efficiency, a term real estate agents used when they meant cramped. A kitchenette occupied one corner, its appliances older than his son. The bathroom barely provided room to turn around. But Jack had slept in worse conditions in places where mortar fire served as alarm clocks, and the nearest medical facility required a helicopter extraction. On the windowsill, a single photograph stood in a cheap wooden frame. 2 men in desert camouflage, arms around each other's shoulders, mountains rising behind them in the harsh Afghan light. Jack's face looked younger in the image, less weathered, before Coruscant had carved its lessons into his features. The man beside him smiled with the easy confidence of someone who believed he would live forever. Michael Chen had been wrong about that. Alex sat cross-legged on the narrow bed, the pulse oximeter clipped to his finger, glowing with green numbers. 8 years old, blonde hair, perpetually refusing to lie flat despite Jack's best efforts with a comb, and eyes that held the quiet seriousness of a child who had learned too early that the world was not always kind. 94%. The boy's voice carried the crisp efficiency of a field medic reporting vitals. "Better than last night." Jack checked the reading himself, a ritual they both understood. The asthma had nearly killed Alex twice before his 5th birthday, once during a thunderstorm that knocked out power for 6 hours once in a grocery store when some shopper's perfume triggered a cascade that ended with paramedics and a hospital bill Jack was still paying off. Keep your inhaler in your front pocket today. He moved to the kitchenette, cracking eggs into a pan that had seen better decades. Not the backpack, front pocket where you can reach it in 3 seconds. I know, Dad. Humor me. The medicine cabinet above the sink contained their most valuable possessions. 2 boxes of albuterol inhalers, each one representing $190 he didn't have to spare. The pharmacy wanted $380 per box without insurance, and the warehouse job offered coverage that could charitably be described as theoretical. Jack had learned to stretch every canister to ration puffs like a man portioning water in the desert. His bank account held $412. Rent would consume $350 in 9 days. The math didn't work. It never worked. But he would figure something out the way he always did because the alternative was unthinkable. Alex's lunch went into the worn backpack with the care of a man packing ammunition for a mission. Turkey sandwich, apple juice box, and a folded note that read, "You're braver than you know. Dad loves you, infinity." The boy found these notes embarrassing now at the advanced age of 8, but Jack had seen him smooth the papers carefully and tuck them into his desk at school. Some traditions mattered too much to surrender to dignity. The walk to Jefferson Elementary took 11 minutes at Alex's pace 14, if they stopped to examine interesting rocks or debate the relative merits of various dinosaurs. This morning they made it in 10, Jack's internal clock running hot with an anxiety he couldn't name. A Mercedes gleamed at the curb near the school entrance, its owner emerging in a suit that cost more than Jack earned in 3 months. The man's eyes swept over Jack's coveralls with the dismissive glance of someone cataloging the help, then moved on without acknowledgement. Jack felt nothing. He had learned long ago that judgment from strangers carried no weight compared to the judgment he leveled at himself. He knelt before his son, bringing their eyes level. "Remember the rules," Alex nodded with exaggerated patience. "Breathe with my belly, not my chest. Use the inhaler at the first sign of tightness. Don't wait." And a small smile cracked the boy's serious expression. "And Dad loves me more than everything in the universe combined times infinity." Jack pulled him close, feeling the thin shoulders beneath his hands, the fragile bones that contained his entire reason for living. "That's my soldier. Have a good day." He watched until Alex disappeared through the double doors, then waited another 30 seconds to ensure no one followed. Paranoid. But paranoia had kept him alive through 3 deployments in one mission that still visited him in dreams. His phone buzzed as he turned toward the bus stop. Unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail. Some instinct stayed his thumb. "Hello, Marine." The voice came through a digital filter, rendered genderless and mechanical. "Remember Khorasan?" Jack's blood crystallized in his veins. That mission was classified beyond top secret, buried so deep that even the families of the dead had received only sanitized explanations. No one outside the unit should know that name. No one outside the graves they'd left in the Afghan mountains. Who is this? Someone who knows what really happened. Someone who knows why Michael Chen died. A pause filled with static. Someone who knows you didn't save him. The line went dead. Jack stood motionless on the sidewalk, pedestrians flowing around him like water around a stone. His hand trembled slightly as he lowered the phone. Not from fear, from something older and darker, the kind of rage that had no safe outlet. Khorasan. He hadn't spoken that word aloud in 5 years. Hadn't let himself think about the blood on his hands, the screams in the darkness, the moment when everything went wrong, and 3 good men paid for someone else's betrayal. The convenience store on Morrison Street smelled of stale coffee and artificial air freshener, its fluorescent lights buzzing with the consistency of summer insects. Jack needed caffeine before his afternoon shift, needed something to ground him after the phone call that had shattered his carefully constructed peace. She stood in the bread aisle, the same woman he'd noticed around the neighborhood lately, always alone, always with her head down and her shoulders hunched against some invisible weight. Her hair hung lank around a face that might have been pretty, before exhaustion carved hollows beneath her eyes. The coat she wore looked 2 sizes too large and entirely inadequate for the November chill seeping through Portland's bones. Her lips moved silently as she counted coins in her palm. Quarter, dime, nickel, 3 pennies. Not enough for the granola bar she kept touching, then releasing, then touching it again. Jack recognized the calculation happening behind her eyes. Bus fare or food, warmth or sustenance. The impossible arithmetic of survival that no one should have to perform in a country this wealthy. He grabbed a turkey sandwich from the refrigerated case, a bottle of water, and made his way to the register. Then, as though the thought had just occurred to him, he doubled back and collected a second sandwich, another water. These together, he placed everything on the counter. The woman looked up when he approached, wariness flashing across her features before she could mask it. People in her situation learned to distrust unexpected kindness. There was always a cost, always an angle. Jack held out the food without explanation. Everyone has bad days. Things get better. I can't. You can. He pressed the sandwich and water into her hands, not forcefully, but with the quiet insistence of someone who had made up his mind. Take care of yourself. He paid for his own items and left before she could protest further. At the door, something made him pause and glance back. She stood where he'd left her, clutching the sandwich like it might evaporate, tears tracking silent paths down her hollow cheeks. There was something familiar about her face, something he couldn't place. But his bus was coming, and his shift started in 40 minutes, and he didn't have time to solve puzzles that were none of his business. He would think about that later. Much later, when the truth exploded across his life like a grenade with a delayed fuse. 6 o'clock the next morning arrived, gray and cold frost etching patterns across the window that Alex would normally trace with his finger while making up stories about ice kingdoms. But the boy still slept, chest rising and falling with the rhythm Jack had monitored through countless nights of fear. The formula in the bottle was warm when Jack tested it against his wrist. An indulgence perhaps for an 8-year-old, but Alex had drunk warm milk every morning since infancy, and some comforts were worth preserving in a world that offered few. He pushed open the bathroom door, expecting nothing but the cracked mirror and mildew-stained tile that greeted him every day. The woman from the convenience store stood before the sink. Her hair hung wet against her shoulders, dripping onto the floor. Her face had gone pale as chalk, her eyes swollen from hours of crying. Her entire body trembled with cold or fear, or both, shaking so hard that the mirror rattled slightly in its frame. Jack's combat training engaged before conscious thought could interfere. Threat assessment, no visible weapons posture, defensive rather than aggressive, pupils dilated from stress rather than drugs. She wasn't here to hurt him. She was here because she had nowhere else to go. His free hand found the door frame, anchoring him against the vertigo of this impossible intrusion into his carefully guarded space. You. His voice came out harsh, stripped of the warmth he'd shown her the day before. How did you get in? She flinched at his tone but didn't retreat. The back door. It doesn't lock properly. The latch is broken, and Dad. Alex's voice drifted from the bedroom, muzzy with sleep. Who are you talking to? The woman's face went white. Whiter. Whatever color remained drained away like water through sand. Please, the word broke on its way out of her throat. Don't let him see me. If they're watching, if they know I'm here. Who's watching? What are you talking about? But she had pressed herself into the corner, arms wrapped around her body, making herself as small as possible. Her eyes held the desperate terror of a hunted animal, and Jack recognized that look. He had seen it in refugees fleeing artillery strikes and prisoners, uncertain whether their rescuers would prove as cruel as their captors. Stay here. He stepped back into the main room, closing the bathroom door behind him. Alex, buddy, I need you to stay in bed for another minute. Dad has to take care of something. His son's face appeared in the gap between pillow and blanket, curious but obedient. Is everything okay? No, nothing was okay. The carefully constructed walls of Jack's quiet life were crumbling, and he didn't understand why. Everything's fine. Just stay there. He returned to the bathroom, pulling the door shut with a soft click that seemed to echo like thunder. The woman hadn't moved from her corner, still trembling, still watching him with those desperate eyes. Start talking. He kept his voice low, controlled, the same tone he'd used when interrogating suspected insurgents in another life. Who are you? Why are you here? And how do you know about Coruscant? Her breath caught. How did you... Someone called me yesterday, mentioned that name, mentioned Michael Chen. He watched her reaction carefully, the way her face crumpled at the fresh tears that spilled down cheeks already raw from crying. You know who Michael Chen was? A sound escaped her that might have been a laugh if it contained any humor. I should. I was married to him. The floor tilted beneath Jack's feet. He saw it now, what he'd missed before. The shape of her eyes, the angle of her cheekbones. He'd seen them 1,000 times in photographs Michael carried through 3 deployments, in the video calls that sustained his friend, through endless nights of sand and gunfire and waiting. Sarah, the name emerged like something dragged up from deep water. Sarah Chen. She nodded, and the movement seemed to cost her what little strength remained. She slid down the wall until she sat on the cold tile, knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around herself in a futile attempt at warmth. Michael talked about you, in his letters, in his calls. Her voice came from somewhere far away, disconnected from her shattered expression. He called you Jay, said you were the best man he'd ever served with, said if anything ever happened to him, I should find you. The mission briefing flickered through Jack's memory. 5 men inserted into the Khorasan Mountains to recover a prototype weapon system that had fallen into enemy hands. Simple extraction. Should have taken 48 hours. Instead, the enemy knew they were coming. Ambush at the landing zone. 3 dead in the first 90 seconds. Michael took 2 rounds to the chest, pulling Jack behind cover, and Jack had held him for 20 minutes while life leaked out between his fingers. Some promises outlive us. Michael's last words pressed into Jack's ear along with blood-wet breath. Sarah and Emma. Promise me, brother. Promise. He had promised. Then he had buried that promise under 5 years of silence and distance, because keeping it meant facing what he'd lost, what he'd failed to prevent. They killed him. Sarah's words cut through his remembrance. But it wasn't enemy intelligence. It wasn't bad luck. She reached into the pocket of her wet coat and produced a USB drive, small and black, holding it up like evidence in a trial. Someone sold the mission details. Someone in our own country. Jack's jaw tightened. How do you know that? Because I found the proof. She met his eyes, and beneath the fear and exhaustion, he saw something else. Steel. Determination. The fire of someone who had lost everything and discovered that loss could be transmuted into purpose. I'm the CEO of Chen Technologies now, Michael's company. 2 months ago, I found discrepancies in our financial records. Money moving to shell companies, contracts with vendors that didn't exist. I started investigating. She paused, swallowing hard. The CFO, Victor Harmon, was behind the embezzlement. Millions of dollars siphoned into offshore accounts. But when I dug deeper, I found something else. Old emails on archived servers, communications from 5 years ago. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Communications detailing exactly when and where Michael's unit would be inserted into Khorasan. The implications crashed over Jack like a wave breaking on stone. Victor Harmon hadn't just stolen money. He had sold intelligence to the enemy. He had murdered Michael and 2 other good men, and he had walked free for 5 years while their families grieved. Where is Victor now? Hunting me. Sarah clutched the USB drive tighter. I confronted him. Stupid. I should have gone straight to the authorities, but I was angry, and I wanted to see his face when he knew I had proof. Her laugh held no humor. He smiled. Told me smart women knew when to keep their mouths shut. Then he had security throw me out. Within hours, my bank accounts were frozen. My apartment was broken into. When I went to the police, they said there was no evidence of a crime. Jack understood. Men like Victor Harmon didn't accumulate power without learning how to protect it. Connections in law enforcement. Judges who owed favors. The machinery of influence that could make inconvenient truths disappear. Why come to me? Because you're the only one Michael trusted. Sarah's composure finally cracked sobs, shaking her thin frame. Because I have nowhere else to go. Because they took Emma this night, and they say if I don't hand over this drive in 36 hours, they'll... She couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Emma, Michael's daughter. The child Jack had promised to protect, the promise he had broken by hiding from his own grief. 7 years old, blonde hair like her father, a laugh that Michael had once described as the best sound in the universe, in the hands of men who had already proven their willingness to kill. Jack knelt before Sarah, putting himself at her eye level, letting her see the transformation happening behind his features. The warehouse worker was receding, the single father who struggled with grocery bills and heating costs. Something older was surfacing, something colder. The warrior he had tried so hard to bury was clawing its way out of its grave. "Tell me everything." His voice carried no warmth now, no comfort, only the precision of a weapon being calibrated. "Every detail you have about Victor, his security, where he might be holding Emma. Then we're going to get your daughter back." Sarah stared at him as though seeing him for the first time. "You would do that for someone you've never met." "Not for you." Jack stood, extending his hand to help her up. "For Michael. He asked me to protect his family. That's an order I never got released from." Some promises don't end with death. They just wait for the right moment to be fulfilled. The next 3 hours passed in tactical preparation. Sarah provided everything she knew about Victor Harmon, his habits, his properties, the security contractors he employed. Jack absorbed the information with the focus of a man planning an assault, drawing diagrams on scrap paper, noting entry points and escape routes and potential complications. Alex needed to be protected first. Jack couldn't fight effectively with his son in the line of fire. Mrs. Patterson answered her door before the second knock, as though she had been expecting him. 70 years old, white hair pulled back in a severe bun, eyes that had witnessed horrors in field hospitals throughout Vietnam, and come out harder rather than broken. "You have that look." Her voice carried the rasp of someone who had spent too many years breathing surgical smoke. "Same look the boys got before a bad push." Jack didn't insult her intelligence with deflection. "I need you to take Alex somewhere safe. Your daughter's place outside the city. There are men who might come looking for me, and I don't want him anywhere near this building." Mrs. Patterson studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded, turning back into her apartment and returning with a wooden box that had clearly traveled through decades and across continents. Inside, a Colt 1911 gleamed with the devoted maintenance of a weapon that had seen use and earned respect. Beside it, 2 magazines fully loaded. "My husband carried this through 2 tours." She placed the box in Jack's hands. "He told me to give it to someone who needed it more than he did. Figured he was talking about our son, but he never wanted anything to do with guns." Her eyes met Jack's with the understanding of someone who had witnessed the cost of violence and accepted it anyway. "Bring back whoever needs bringing back. Do what needs doing." Jack checked the weapon with movements so practiced they required no thought. Magazine seated properly. Slide action smooth. Sights aligned. The weight settled into his palm like a handshake with an old friend. "I'll return it when this is done." "You'll do no such thing." Mrs. Patterson's voice allowed no argument. "Consider it a gift, or a loan if your pride requires. But that gun spent 40 years waiting for a purpose. Seems like it finally found one." He collected Alex from the apartment, explaining only that they were going on an adventure to visit Mrs. Patterson's daughter, who had a fun and a backyard in video games that Alex had never played. The boy sensed something wrong beneath his father's calm, but he had learned early that some questions had answers he wasn't meant to hear. At the door, Alex turned back. His eyes, too old for his face, searched Jack's expression. "You're going to help the crying lady, aren't you?" Jack knelt, pulling his son into an embrace that lasted longer than usual. "Yeah, buddy. Someone needs help, and Dad's the only one who can give it." "Is it dangerous?" He wouldn't lie to his child. Never had, never would, even when the truth was sharp enough to cut. "A little bit, but I've done dangerous things before, and I always came back." He pressed his forehead against Alex's breathing in the scent of cheap shampoo and childhood innocence. "I'll always come back to you. That's a promise stronger than anything else in the world." Alex nodded solemnly. Then he whispered something that Jack would carry with him through the hours ahead, words that weighed more than any medal or commendation he had ever received. "I know you're a hero, Dad, even if you pretend you're not." They left the building through the back entrance, Jack first, then Sarah, moving with the urgency of people who understood that every moment of delay was a moment Emma spent in the hands of her captors. The SUV appeared from nowhere, black paint gleaming under the gray Portland sky. Windows tinted past the point of legality, engine rumbling with the throaty authority of excessive horsepower. Jack's hand moved to the weapon concealed beneath his jacket, even as he pushed Sarah behind him, putting his body between her and the threat. 2 men emerged from the vehicle, dark suits professional, bearing the kind of economical movement that spoke of combat training and recent practice. One carried himself with the coiled readiness of a pit fighter. The other had the cold eyes of a man who had stopped feeling empathy long ago. "Mr. Reeves." The cold-deed one smiled without warmth. We were hoping to have a conversation. Jack assessed the situation in fragments of seconds. Two hostiles armed positioning for crossfire. Sarah behind him, unarmed civilian. Street mostly empty, a few pedestrians at the far end already hurrying away from the tension they sensed. No immediate backup available. Bad odds. He had faced worse. I don't have conversations with people who don't introduce themselves. Fair enough. We work for someone who's very interested in the lady behind you and the item she's carrying. The man took a step closer, hand drifting toward his jacket. This can go easy or hard, your choice. Jack didn't waste time with negotiation. He moved. The first man was still reaching for his weapon when Jack closed the distance, faster than anyone watching would have believed possible for a man his age. Strike to the throat just hard enough to collapse the airway temporarily. The man went down, gasping, no longer a threat. 3 seconds. The second reacted, better training kicking in hand, completing its journey to the pistol at his hip. But Jack was already there, trapping the wrist before the weapon cleared, leather twisting with precise leverage. The gun clattered to the pavement. An elbow to the solar plexus doubled the man over. A knee to the face as he bent forward ended the engagement. 5 seconds more. 8 seconds total. Two hostiles neutralized. No casualties, no witnesses, no evidence beyond unconscious bodies that would wake with headaches and bruised egos. Jack retrieved both fallen weapons, press-checked them out of habit, then turned to Sarah. She stared at him with an expression caught between terror and awe. The man who had handed her a sandwich in a convenience store was gone, replaced by something that moved like violence given human form. We need to go. He took her arm, guiding her away from the scene. There will be more of them. How did you? That was 15 years of Marine Corps Special Operations. He kept his voice flat, focused on scanning their surroundings for additional threats. Some skills you don't lose. Some debts you don't stop paying. They cut through an alley, then another, Jack navigating the maze of Portland's back streets with the confidence of someone who had memorized every escape route within a mile of his apartment. The cold-eyed man's phone buzzed against his unconscious hip. And somewhere across the city, Jack knew their enemy was receiving news that the situation had just become more complicated. Good. Complicated was where he thrived. Where are we going? Sarah struggled to keep pace, her exhaustion evident in every step. Somewhere safe while I make some calls. I have contacts who can help us. Jack's mind was already working through the tactical problem, identifying assets and liabilities, constructing a plan from fragments of information and hard-won experience. Victor made a mistake coming after you. He should have made sure I was neutralized first. Why? Jack paused at a corner, checking both directions before crossing. His eyes, when they met hers, held the cold fire of purpose long denied. Because I made a promise to your husband, the last thing he asked of me while he was dying in my arms. Protect his family. Keep them safe. He reached into his pocket and produced the old compass that Michael had given him, the one he'd carried through every mission, the one engraved with their unit's motto. Some promises outlive us. They just wait for the right moment to be fulfilled. Sarah's hand trembled as she touched the compass, recognition dawning in her tear-filled eyes. Michael showed me this. He said it belonged to his best friend. He said if anything ever happened, then you should find the man who carries it. Jack closed her fingers around the brass, a gesture that felt like accepting a burden he should never have tried to set down. You found me, Sarah. 5 years too late, but you found me. And I'm going to finish what I should have started the day Michael died. He straightened shoulders, settling into the posture of a man who had remembered his true calling. We're going to get Emma back. We're going to expose Victor Harmon for what he is, and we're going to make Michael's death mean something. His phone vibrated with an incoming message. Unknown number again, but this time he recognized the format of the sender ID. Military encryption, the kind that didn't exist in civilian databases. The message contained 2 words in a Time Horizon file. 2300. Someone else was hunting for the truth. Someone with access to classified intelligence and the willingness to share it. Jack stared at the screen, feeling the threads of a conspiracy beginning to untangle in his mind. Victor Harmon was connected to something larger. The men who attacked them were professional, well-equipped, part of an organization that extended beyond a single corporate embezzler. And somewhere in the darkness, Other forces were moving, gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. The war he thought he had left behind had followed him home. But this time he wasn't fighting for a flag or a mission objective. He was fighting for a little girl who deserved her mother, for a widow who deserved justice, for a promise made to a dying friend in a place called Khorasan, where the sand ran red with blood. Some men served until their enlistment ended. Others served until they stopped breathing. Jack Reeves had learned that the uniform came off, but the duty never did. And his duty right now was pointing him toward Victor Harmon and the secret that had cost Michael Chen his life. He tucked the phone away and took Sarah's arm, guiding her toward the safe house he'd identified years ago, the contingency he'd hoped never to use. "We have work to do, and we're just getting started." The safe house occupied the basement of a condemned church on Portland's east side, its entrance hidden behind a dumpster that hadn't been moved in 3 years. Jack had discovered the location during his first month in the city, mapping escape routes and fallback positions the way other men map jogging trails and coffee shops. Old habits, the kind that separated survivors from statistics. Sarah sat on a salvaged pew, her wet clothes finally beginning to dry in the warmth of the space heater Jack had installed during a paranoid weekend 2 years ago. The USB drive remained clutched in her hand, knuckles white around the small device that contained enough evidence to destroy an empire. Jack's phone connected on the second ring. The voice that answered carried the gravel of too many cigarettes and too many years of command. This number was supposed to be dead. Colonel David Hayes didn't bother with greetings. 62 years of military service had burned away such pleasantries. "So was I, sir. Turns out we were both wrong." Silence stretched across the connection. Jack could picture the old man sitting in his study in Virginia, surrounded by medals he never displayed and photographs of men who never came home. Hayes had commanded 5th Special Forces Group during Jack's final deployment, had personally signed the orders that sent them into Khorasan, had attended 3 funerals, and delivered 3 folded flags to 3 grieving families. Jack Reeves. The name came out like a prayer and a curse intertwined. 5 years without a word. "I thought you'd eaten your gun like Thompson did." "Considered it, had reasons not to." "Your boy, my boy." Another pause, this one weighted with understanding that required no elaboration. Hayes had lost his own son in Iraq, had walked the same dark corridors that Jack navigated every night when sleep refused to come. "Why are you calling?" Jack outlined the situation in precise military terms. Sarah Chen, Victor Harmon, the USB drive containing evidence of financial fraud, and something far worse. Emma's kidnapping, the 36-hour deadline ticking toward zero. Khorasan. Hayes exhaled the word like smoke from a fire that had never stopped burning. "I investigated that compromise for 2 years. Dead ends everywhere. Someone with serious pull buried it deep." Victor Harmon had communications on his servers, emails detailing our insertion point timing, team composition. Everything the enemy needed to set up that ambush. "You're certain?" Sarah Chen found them. She's sitting across from me right now with the proof in her hand. And the colonel's breathing changed, becoming sharper, more focused. The sound of a predator catching a scent. "Victor Harmon is connected, Jack. Board memberships, political donations, the kind of friends who can make problems disappear. If you move against him without proper support, you'll end up in a black site or a shallow grave. I'm aware of the risks. Are you aware that Harmon has been flagged by FBI counterintelligence for the past 18 months? There's an investigation. Quiet, compartmented, need to know only." Hayes's voice dropped lower. "I know the agent running it. Diane Foster. Good soldier, even if she never wore a uniform. She's been building a case but couldn't get the evidence to make it stick." Jack's tactical mind reorganized the battlefield. An FBI investigation meant resources, legal authority, the machinery of justice that could crush Victor Harmon more thoroughly than any bullet. "Can you reach her?" "I can do better than that. Give me 2 hours. I'll set up a meeting, get you official protection, bring the full weight of federal law enforcement down on this bastard." Hayes paused. "But Jack, you need to stay low until then. Don't engage. Don't give Harmon's people any excuse to eliminate you before we can move. There's a 7-year-old girl in their hands, sir. I'm not sure I have 2 hours to spare." "I understand, but if you go in alone and get killed, that little girl loses her only chance at rescue. Think tactically, Marine. Sometimes the hardest thing is waiting for the right moment to strike. Jack closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing against his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to act, to fulfill the promise that had haunted him for 5 years. But Hayes was right. Emotion made men stupid. Stupid men made mistakes. Mistakes got hostages killed. 2 hours, not a minute more. Semper Fi, Jack. Semper Fi, sir. The connection ended. Jack set the phone down and turned to find Sarah watching him with an expression caught between hope and terror. He's going to help. He's going to try. FBI has been investigating Victor for over a year. We might have the missing piece they need to take him down. Jack crossed to the ancient laptop he kept in the safe house, its hard drive wiped and reinstalled so many times that even forensic specialists would find nothing useful. But I need to see those files. Everything you have on Victor's communications. Sarah handed over the USB drive with the reverence of someone passing a sacred relic. Jack inserted it into the laptop, watching as folders populated the screen. Financial records, emails, calendar entries, the digital skeleton of Victor Harmon's secret life. He found the Coruscant file within 3 minutes. The email thread stretched back 5 years, a timeline of betrayal written in corporate jargon and encrypted references. Victor Harmon to an address that resolved to nothing. Servers bounced through a dozen countries, the digital equivalent of a ghost. Package delivery confirmed for 15th. Western approach, 5 units. Arrival time, 0300. Jack read the words 3 times, feeling something cold and heavy settle in his stomach. Those coordinates, that timing, the exact parameters of their insertion into hostile territory transmitted to the enemy 12 hours before boots hit the ground. Michael had died because of these words. Martinez and Kowalski, 2 good men with families waiting for homecomings that never happened. There's more. Sarah leaned over his shoulder, her finger tracing a path through the folder structure. I didn't have time to read everything before I ran, but there's a reference to something called Prometheus, multiple mentions across different years. Jack clicked through the files, watching the scope of the conspiracy expand with each document. Prometheus wasn't just Victor Harmon. It was a network, names redacted but influence, evident tendrils reaching into military contracting and political campaigns and intelligence operations across 3 continents. This is bigger than embezzlement. His voice came out flat, stripped of emotion by the magnitude of what he was seeing. This is the intelligence selling operation. They've been peddling American secrets for years. Michael found out. Sarah's words trembled with the weight of revelation. That's why they killed him. Not because of the mission, because he was investigating them. Jack remembered the weeks before Horasan, the way Michael had grown quieter, more distracted, the late nights he'd spent on encrypted communications that he never discussed. He had assumed it was marital stress, the strain of deployment, the 1,000 small fractures that combat inflicted on relationships. He had been wrong. Michael Chen had been hunting the same enemy that was now hunting his widow, and he had paid for that hunt with his life. There's a file here labeled Prometheus Network. Jack clicked it, watching the encryption prompt appear. Locked. Whatever's inside Victor didn't want anyone accessing it without authorization. Can you break it? No, but I know people who can. He pulled out his phone, composed a quick message to an old friend who now worked in cybersecurity, someone who owed him a favor that could never be fully repaid. This might take time we don't have. The laptop chimed with an incoming email. Jack's secure address, the one he'd created specifically for situations that required anonymity. The sender field showed nothing but a string of numbers. He opened the message. Coruscant wasn't about the prototype. Michael Chen was the target. They needed him silenced before he exposed everything. Jack stared at the screen, feeling the ground shift beneath his understanding of the past 5 years. Not a failed mission. An assassination. Michael had been murdered by his own countrymen, and Jack had been nothing but collateral damage they'd failed to eliminate. Who sent that? Sarah's voice cracked on the question. I don't know. Someone with access to classified intelligence who wants the truth to come out. Jack forwarded the message to Colonel Hayes with a brief note requesting verification. But if this is accurate, then Victor Harmon didn't just sell information. He orchestrated the execution of an American soldier who threatened to expose his network. His phone rang, not Hayes, the school's number. Ice crystallized in Jack's veins as he answered. Mr. Reeves, the principal's voice carried the particular tension of someone delivering news they didn't fully understand. This is Margaret Hayes at Jefferson Elementary. I'm calling about Alex. Jack's hand tightened on the phone until the plastic creaked. What about him? He's fine, he's safe. Mrs. Patterson picked him up early this morning and said you'd arranged it, but there's been an incident I need to make you aware of. The principal explained. A man had arrived at the school 20 minutes ago claiming to be a friend of Jack's from military service, asking to see Alex. When the office staff requested identification, he'd become evasive. When they insisted on calling Jack for confirmation, he'd left abruptly. He left something on the front desk before he went. A photograph. What photograph? It's your apartment, Mr. Reeves, taken from inside, from what looks like your living room. The temperature in the basement dropped 20 degrees. Someone had been inside his home, had stood where Alex slept, breathed the same air, photographed the space where Jack had built his fragile peace. A message, a threat, a declaration of war. Mr. Reeves, are you still there? Thank you for calling. I'll handle it from here. He ended the call and immediately dialed Mrs. Patterson. She answered before the first ring completed, as though she'd been waiting with the phone in her hand. We're safe. Her voice carried the crisp efficiency of a combat medic under fire. Two men have been watching the building since dawn. I spotted them from my daughter's window. Took the boy out through the basement utility access at 0600 before they set up their observation post. Relief flooded through Jack's chest, quickly replaced by a cold calculation. They know about Alex. They're using him as leverage. Figured as much when I saw the surveillance team, military bearing professional equipment. These aren't street criminals, Jack. No, they're contractors. Former special operations, probably. Working for a man named Victor Harmon. The tech executive, I've seen him on the news. Mrs. Patterson's tone sharpened. What did you step in? A conspiracy that goes back 5 years, maybe longer. Jack checked his weapon, verified the magazine, calculated how many rounds he had available. Not enough if things went sideways. Never enough. I need you to keep Alex hidden until this is over. Can you do that? Boy's eating pancakes and playing with my daughter's deathbed. He thinks this is a vacation. A pause waited with understanding earned through decades of proximity to violence. How bad is it? Bad enough that they're willing to threaten a child to get what they want. Jack's jaw tightened. Bad enough that I'm going to have to become someone I thought I'd left behind. Then become him. Do what needs doing, and come back to that boy when it's finished. Yes, ma'am. He ended the call and turned to Sarah, who had gone pale during the one-sided conversation. They know about your son. They know everything. Jack began packing the laptop and documents into a waterproof bag, which means we've run out of time to wait for official channels. Victor's people are tightening the noose. If we don't move now, they'll find us before the FBI can mobilize. But Colonel Hayes said, Hayes was right about the tactical situation. But the tactical situation just changed. He slung the bag over his shoulder and checked the exit routes he'd memorized years ago. They went after my son. That makes this personal. Sarah stood, her exhaustion temporarily overcome by determination. What do we do? You said Victor has a property outside the city, a house in the woods where he takes private meetings. The Cascade Retreat, about 40 miles east near Mount Hood. That's where they'll be holding Emma, close enough to maintain control, isolated enough to conduct business without witnesses. Jack handed her a burner phone from his emergency supplies. Colonel Hayes will call when the FBI is ready to move. When he does, you give them the location and tell them everything you know about Victor's security arrangements. What about you? Jack met her eyes and she saw the transformation complete itself. The warehouse worker had vanished entirely. The man standing before her moved like shadow given form, all soft edges burned away by purpose. I'm going to get your daughter back. You can't go alone. You said yourself there are at least 4 guards, maybe more. Professional contractors with military training. I've faced worse odds. And what if they kill you? What happens to Emma? What happens to your own son? The question hit harder than any blow. Jack felt it reverberate through his chest, finding the vulnerable places he'd tried so hard to armor. My son is safe with someone I trust. Your daughter is in the hands of men who've already proven they'll kill to protect their secrets. He took Sarah's hands, feeling them tremble in his grip. I made a promise to Michael. The last thing he asked of me while he was dying, I've broken that promise for 5 years. I'm not breaking it anymore. Then I'm coming with you. Sarah, don't. Her voice hardened, finding steel beneath the fear. Emma is my daughter, my responsibility. I won't sit in some basement while you risk your life for my family. She pulled her hands free and stood straighter, her chin rising with defiance. Michael taught me how to shoot. I'm not helpless. Jack studied her weighing capability against liability. She was exhausted, traumatized, operating on reserves that had to be nearly depleted. But he saw something else in her eyes. The same fire that had driven Michael Chen to investigate Prometheus despite the danger. The same determination that had kept her running when easier options beckoned. Some qualities bred true. If you come, you follow my orders without question. When I say move, you move. When I say hide, you hide. When I say run, you run and don't look back. Understood? I mean it, Sarah. This isn't a movie. Things go wrong fast in the field, and hesitation gets people killed. I can't protect Emma and protect you at the same time. You need to protect yourself. Sarah nodded, her jaw set with resolution that reminded Jack painfully of her dead husband. Then teach me what I need to know. They spent the next hour in preparation. Jack showed her how to hold the backup weapon. He provided a compact 9mm that fit her smaller hands. He drilled her on basic tactical movement, how to use cover versus concealment, how to keep her head down, and her finger off the trigger until she had a clear target. She absorbed the lessons with the focus of someone whose child's life depended on her education. As dusk settled over Portland, they moved. Jack had acquired a vehicle through channels that didn't require paperwork, a gray sedan anonymous enough to blend with traffic, but powerful enough to outrun pursuit if necessary. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, fingers wrapped around the weapon in her lap, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The drive took 47 minutes. Jack used the time to visualize the assault, running through scenarios and contingencies the way he'd done before, countless missions in places whose names most Americans would never hear. Entry points, guard positions, hostage location, extraction routes. The Cascade Retreat emerged from the forest like a predator's den, all sharp angles and dark windows perched on a ridge overlooking a valley that could have graced a postcard if not for the security cameras visible at each corner of the property. Jack parked a half-mile out, killing the lights and engine in a pullout screened by evergreens. 2 guards on external patrol. He studied the property through compact binoculars, cataloging threats with the efficiency of long practice. 4 more inside based on movement patterns through the windows. Emma's likely on the 2nd floor northeast corner. That's where the lights are still on. How do you know that's where they're keeping her? It's where I'd keep a hostage. High ground, single point of entry, clear sight lines for the guards. Victor's people know what they're doing. Sarah absorbed this information with visible effort to maintain composure. Her daughter treated as a tactical asset, a bargaining chip, a pressure point to be exploited. How do we get her out? You don't. You stay here with the phone. When I signal, you call Hayes and give him this location. Jack checked his weapon one final time. I go in alone, neutralize the external patrol, infiltrate the structure, locate Emma, and extract her before the internal security can respond. That's insane. 6 armed professionals against 1 man. I've operated against worse ratios. He met her eyes in the darkness. Trust me, Sarah. This is what I was trained to do. What I spent 15 years perfecting. Your job is to stay alive and make sure help arrives in case something goes wrong. And if something goes wrong, Jack didn't answer. Some possibilities didn't deserve verbalization. He slipped from the vehicle and melted into the forest, becoming one with the shadows the way he'd learned in jungles and deserts and mountains where the wrong footfall meant death. The terrain posed no challenge. He'd navigated worse blindfolded, with gunfire providing the only illumination. The first guard never heard him coming. Jack approached from downwind, moving between trees with the patience of a hunting cat. The man stood at the corner of the property, cigarette glowing in cupped hands, attention focused on his phone rather than his surroundings. Amateur mistake. The kind that got people killed in actual combat. 3 seconds of exposure. Jack covered the distance in 2, his arms snaking around the guard's throat before the cigarette could fall. Pressure on the carotid arteries, precise and controlled. The man went limp without making a sound. Jack lowered him to the ground, secured his wrists and ankles with zip ties, removed the radio and weapon. One down. The second patrol guard was more alert, walking his circuit with the purposeful stride of someone who took his job seriously. Jack watched him complete one loop, timing the intervals, identifying the blind spots where landscaping and architecture created pockets of darkness. He struck during the guard's turn at the far corner, when the man's attention necessarily focused on the new direction of travel. A blow to the back of the knee buckled the leg. A palm strike to the temple completed the work. 8 seconds from initiation to conclusion. 2 down, 4 remaining. The house's rear entrance featured an electronic lock that should have posed a problem. Jack produced a device from his kit that had cost him 2 months already to acquire from a former colleague in technical operations. 30 seconds of patient manipulation, and the lock disengaged with a soft click. He eased the door open, sliding through the gap with the fluid grace of someone who had made such entries 100 times before. The interior smelled of expensive leather and wood polish, the scent of wealth accumulated through means that didn't bear examination. Voices drifted from the front of the house. 2 men discussing something in bored tones. A television murmured beneath their conversation, some sporting event providing background noise. Jack moved through the ground floor like a ghost, clearing rooms by instinct, cataloging positions and angles and threats. The staircase to the second floor rose in a spiral, beautiful architectural design that created blind corners at every turn. He ascended with his weapon leaning back, pressed against the wall, each step calculated to minimize sound. The carpet helped, expensive pile that absorbed footfalls and returned nothing but silence. The second floor hallway stretched in both directions, doors closed, lights visible beneath only one. Northeast corner, just as he'd predicted. A guard stood outside that door, arms crossed, attention fixed on his phone. The posture of a man who expected nothing to happen and had grown complacent in that expectation. Jack was 10 feet away before the guard's instincts finally screamed a warning. The man looked up, eyes widening, hand moving toward the weapon at his hip. Too slow. Jack closed the distance in a heartbeat, trapping the gun hand before it could complete its journey. Wrist lock torque, the weapon clattering to the floor. An elbow strike to the solar plexus drove the air from the guard's lungs. A palm strike to the chin snapped his head back. He crumpled without a sound. 3 down. Jack tried the door, locked from the outside. He found the key in the unconscious guard's pocket and turned it with the care of a surgeon. The room beyond held a child's nightmare made manifest. Emma Chen sat huddled on a bare mattress in the corner, her knees drawn to her chest, a stuffed rabbit clutched in her arms. 7 years old, blonde hair tangled, and dirty eyes red from crying. She looked up as the door opened, and Jack saw recognition flash across her features even though they'd never met. "You look like the pictures." Her voice came out small and broken. "The ones Mommy showed me, of Daddy's friend." Jack's throat tightened. He knelt, making himself smaller, less threatening, the way he'd learned to approach traumatized children in villages where American soldiers represented hope and terror in equal measure. "My name is Jack. I'm here to take you to your mom." "The bad men said Mommy was dead." "The bad men lied. Your mom is safe and she's waiting for you." He extended his hand, palm up, offering rather than demanding. "Will you come with me?" Emma studied his face with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone her age. Then she unfolded from her protective ball and took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his with desperate trust. "Daddy told me about you, in his letters. He said you were the bravest person he ever knew." Jack felt something crack in his chest. All those letters Michael had written, all those nights he'd spent describing his comrades to a daughter who might never meet them. Even from the grave, Michael Chen was still reaching out, still connecting, still providing for his family in ways that transcended death. "Your daddy was the brave one. I'm just trying to keep a promise I made him." He lifted Emma, settling her weight against his hip the way he carried Alex when the boy fell asleep on the couch. She was lighter than she should have been, the thinness of a child who hadn't eaten well in days. "We're going to move fast and quiet now. Can you do that for me?" Emma nodded, her arms tightening around his neck. Jack turned toward the door and froze. A man stood in the hallway, emerging from the shadows like a specter given form. Tall, broad-shouldered, silver hair, cut close to a skull that looked like it had been shaped for violence. Eyes the color of winter steel, devoid of warmth or mercy. Raymond Kozlov, the fixer. Jack had heard stories about him during his time in special operations. Former CIA contractor expelled for methods that exceeded even the agency's flexible standards. A man who had made interrogation into an art form and killing into a science. Jack Reeves, Kozlov's voice carried the flat affect of someone who had stopped feeling human emotions decades ago. Force Recon legend. I've read your file. Impressive record. 3 tours, 7 commendations, 1 mission that went spectacularly wrong. A smile that contained no humor. Horrison, we have that in common. I helped plan the ambush that killed your friends. The words hit Jack like bullets, each one finding its mark in the soft tissue of grief he'd tried so hard to scar over. You, me, and others. Victor handles the financial side. I handle the operational necessities. Kozlov spread his hands, revealing that he carried no weapon. You've created quite a problem for us, Marine. Taking out 4 of my men, infiltrating our facility, retrieving the asset. All very impressive, but ultimately pointless. Why pointless? Because you can't win. Kozlov gestured toward the window where the rumble of engines announced new arrivals. Reinforcements. 12 more contractors, well-armed, well-trained, with orders to secure this location and eliminate anyone who resists. His smile widened. You could probably take 4 or 5 of them before they brought you down. Maybe more if you're as good as your file suggests. But the girl would die in the crossfire. Is that what you want? Is that how you keep your promise to Michael Chen? Jack's mind raced through possibilities, discarding options as quickly as they formed. Kozlov was right. 16 men against 1 with a child to protect. The math didn't work. It couldn't work. What do you want? The USB drive, Sarah Chen. A guarantee that the information she's gathered disappears permanently. Kozlov shrugged. In exchange, the girl lives. You live. Everyone walks away, and this unfortunate situation resolves itself without further bloodshed. And Sarah, what happens to her? That's not your concern. It is, actually. Jack shifted Emma's weight, freeing his gun hand while keeping her shielded by his body. Michael Chen asked me to protect his family. All of his family. A noble sentiment. But sentiments don't stop bullets. Kozlov's expression hardened. You have 30 seconds to make a decision, Marine. Surrender the girl and cooperate, or die alongside her when my men storm this building. Choose. Jack looked at Emma, her face pressed against his shoulder, her body trembling with fear. She was too young to fully understand. He thought of Alex, safe with Mrs. Patterson, waiting for a father who might never return. He thought of Sarah huddled in a car down the road, praying for salvation that seemed increasingly unlikely. He thought of Michael bleeding out in the Afghan sand eyes fixed on Jack's face as he extracted a promise that now felt impossible to keep. 20 seconds. 15. And then from somewhere in the darkness, the sound of helicopters. Not 1, 3. Coming in fast and low rotors thrumming with the distinctive rhythm of law enforcement aviation. Searchlights stabbed down through the night, painting the property in harsh white brilliance. Kozlov's composure cracked for the first time. He spun toward the window, eyes widening at the sight of FBI markings on the lead aircraft. FBI weapons down, this property is surrounded. The voice boomed from speakers, impossibly loud, carrying the weight of federal authority. Jack used the moment of distraction. He moved like lightning, shifting Emma to his offhand, while the other drew his weapon. Not aiming at Kozlov. At the window behind him. 2 shots, glass shattering outward, cold air rushing in to fill the vacuum. Jump, Jack commanded, pushing Emma toward the broken window. Below, barely visible in the searchlight's edge, a sloped roof led to a snow-covered lawn. Survivable. Barely. Emma didn't hesitate. She launched herself through the gap with the fearless abandon of a child who trusted completely. Jack followed, feeling Kozlov's fingers brush his shoulder as he dove, missing their grip by millimeters. The roof hit him hard, slate tiles cracking beneath his weight, momentum carrying him forward in a barely controlled slide. Emma had already rolled clear, scrambling through snow that reached her waist. Jack found his feet, scooped her up, and ran. Behind him, chaos erupted. Gunfire crackled as Kozlov's reinforcements engaged with FBI tactical teams. Shouted commands overlapped with the screams of the wounded. Helicopter rotors chopped the air into thunder. Sarah appeared from the tree line, her face illuminated by the strobing lights, arms outstretched toward her daughter. Emma! Mommy, Jack transferred the girl. watching mother and daughter collapse into each other's arms, sobs of relief mixing with the sounds of battle that had erupted behind them. We need to move. He guided them deeper into the forest away from the firefight toward the vehicle that represented their best chance at survival. The FBI has this, but Kozlov's people won't go quietly. They reached the sedan as the first explosion lit up the night, something in the house igniting with a roar that echoed off the surrounding mountains. Jack pushed Sarah and Emma into the back seat, then threw himself behind the wheel, engine roaring to life, tires spitting gravel as they accelerated toward the main road. His phone buzzed. Colonel Hayes. Jack, tell me you're alive. Alive. Have the girl. FBI arrived just in time. Agent Foster moved faster than I expected. She had teams standing by, just needed the location. Hayes's voice carried exhaustion and relief in equal measure. Victor Harmon is in custody. Half his security force is down, the other half is in handcuffs. Kozlov, a pause, escaped in the confusion before the perimeter was fully established. He's in the wind. Jack absorbed this news without surprise. Men like Kozlov didn't survive as long as they had by being easy to capture. There's something else. Hayes's tone shifted, becoming harder, more urgent. The FBI's technical team cracked the Prometheus file from Sarah's USB drive. The full list of network members, names, positions, influence. And, Jack, this goes higher than we imagined. Politicians, generals, intelligence officials. Hayes took a breath. The man running Prometheus isn't some shadowy foreign agent. He's a United States Senator. William Cross. The name hit Jack like a physical blow. William Cross, senior senator from California, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, a man who had stood at Michael Chen's funeral and delivered a eulogy that brought mourners to tears. Sarah's father-in-law, Emma's grandfather, the man who had ordered the death of his own son-in-law to protect his empire of secrets. Jack looked in the rearview mirror where Emma had fallen asleep against her mother's chest, finally safe, finally free from the men who had held her captive. She didn't know yet that her grandfather was a monster, that he had killed her father and tried to kill her mother and would have killed her too if she became inconvenient. Some truths were too heavy for 7-year-old shoulders to bear. Jack, are you still there? I'm here. Foster wants to meet tomorrow. She has a plan to bring Cross down, but she needs witnesses. People willing to testify about what they've seen and experienced. Hayes paused. She needs you and Sarah to go on record. Jack watched the road unspool before him, carrying them towards safety that suddenly felt more fragile than ever. Kozlov was still out there. Senator Cross commanded resources that made Victor Harmon look like a small-time operator. The conspiracy that had killed Michael Chen was wounded but not destroyed, and wounded predators were the most dangerous kind. Tell Foster we'll be there. And Jack, whatever happens next, know that Michael would be proud. You kept your promise when it mattered most. The line went dead. Jack drove on through the darkness toward a tomorrow that promised more battles, more danger, more tests of the promise he'd made to a dying friend in a place called Khorasan. But for now, in this moment, a little girl slept peacefully against her mother's heart. And that was enough. The FBI safe house occupied a nondescript office building in downtown Portland. Its windows tinted beyond transparency, its entrance guarded by men whose suits concealed weapons and whose eyes never stopped moving. Jack guided Sarah through the security checkpoint, submitting to the searches and scans with the patience of someone who understood that vigilance was the price of survival. Agent Diane Foster waited in a conference room on the 3rd floor, surrounded by documents and computer screens that painted the walls with evidence of corruption stretching back decades. 47 years old, hair cropped short in a style that prioritized function over fashion, eyes that had seen enough bureaucratic resistance to make lesser agents surrender to cynicism. She stood as they entered, extending her hand first to Sarah, then to Jack. Mrs. Chen, Mr. Reeves, I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. Her voice carried the measured cadence of someone accustomed to delivering difficult truths. Please sit. We have a great deal to discuss. Emma had been settled in a separate room down the hall, where child psychologists and victim advocates began the gentle process of healing. The girl had clung to her mother until the last moment, extracting promises that Mommy would be right down the hall, that the bad men couldn't reach her, that Uncle Jack would make sure everyone stayed safe. Jack had made that promise with full understanding that keeping it might require sacrifices he hadn't yet calculated. Victor Harmon is in federal custody. Foster pulled up a mugshot on one of the screens showing a man whose arrogance had finally cracked, revealing the fear beneath. He's already trying to negotiate, offering information in exchange for reduced charges. But what he's offering isn't enough. Sarah leaned forward, exhaustion temporarily overwhelmed by the fire that had sustained her through weeks of running. What do you mean, not enough? Harmon is a middle manager. Important, yes. Dangerous, certainly. But he's not the architect of Prometheus. Foster's fingers moved across her keyboard, replacing Victor's image with another face. This is... Senator William Cross stared out from the screen, photographed at some political function, his smile carrying the practiced warmth of a man who had spent 40 years convincing voters that he represented their interests. Distinguished silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of face that inspired trust in constituents who never suspected the rot beneath the surface. My father-in-law. Sarah's voice emerged as barely a whisper. Emma's grandfather. The same man who ordered your husband's assassination, who authorized the ambush at Khorasan, who has spent the last 5 years protecting his network while it sold American intelligence to the highest bidder. Foster's expression hardened. We've been building a case against Cross for 18 months, but he's insulated himself behind layers of cutouts and intermediaries. Every time we get close evidence, disappears. Witnesses recant. Investigations get redirected. Jack understood the frustration. Men like Cross didn't accumulate power without learning how to protect it. They built fortresses of influence, surrounded themselves with people who owed their careers to favors that could never be publicly acknowledged. What do you need from us? Testimony. On the record under oath describing everything you have witnessed and experienced. Foster gestured toward the stacks of documents surrounding her. The USB drive Sarah recovered contains enough evidence to indict Cross on multiple felony charges. But evidence can be challenged. Defense attorneys can argue contamination, chain of custody issues, technical manipulation. What they can't argue away is credible witnesses describing crimes they personally observed. Sarah's hands trembled in her lap. You want me to testify against my daughter's grandfather? To tell the world that he killed my husband and tried to kill us? I want you to help us ensure he never hurts anyone else, that the network he built gets dismantled completely, that the men who died at Khorasan receive the justice they deserve. Foster's voice softened, finding humanity beneath the professional exterior. I know what I'm asking. The personal cost will be enormous. But Mrs. Chen, you've already paid that cost. You've been paying it for 5 years without knowing who was responsible. Now you have a chance to make that suffering mean something. The silence stretched, filled with the weight of decisions that would reshape multiple lives. Jack spoke first. I'll testify. Michael Chen was my brother in everything but blood. He died because Cross needed him silenced. That debt doesn't get forgiven. Sarah looked at him, then at the photograph of her father-in-law, the man who had held Emma at her christening and delivered toasts at holiday dinners and sent birthday cards signed with love. William came to Michael's funeral. He held me while I cried. He promised to take care of us, to make sure Emma never wanted for anything. Her voice cracked on the memories. And the whole time he was the one who ordered the hit, who made me a widow and my daughter an orphan. Some men wear masks so convincing that even they forget what lies beneath. Foster's words carried the weight of cases she'd worked, criminals she'd exposed, the accumulated wisdom of a career spent peeling back surfaces to reveal the corruption underneath. Sarah straightened in her chair, and Jack watched the transformation complete itself. The frightened woman who had appeared in his bathroom 2 days ago was gone. In her place sat someone whose grief had crystallized into purpose. Tell me what I need to do. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of depositions and document reviews and strategic planning. Foster's team worked around the clock building the case that would bring down one of the most powerful men in American politics. Jack provided testimony about Khorasan, about the ambush that had killed his friends, about the years he'd spent wondering who had betrayed them. Sarah proved invaluable, her CEO's mind cutting through financial records with the precision of a surgeon. She identified shell companies and offshore accounts, traced money flows that connected Victor Harmon to Senator Cross through a maze of intermediaries, built a timeline of corruption that stretched back further than anyone had imagined. Emma remained in the safe house, watched over by a rotating team of agents who had been vetted 3 times before being assigned to protection detail. The girl was recovering slowly, nightmares still interrupting her sleep, but the child psychologist reported progress. She asked about Uncle Jack, often wanted to know when she could see him again. The breakthrough came on the 3rd day. Harmon finally broke. Foster burst into the conference room where Jack and Sarah had been reviewing transcripts. He's agreed to testify against Cross in exchange for witness protection and a reduced sentence. Jack felt no satisfaction at the news. Victor Harmon had caused the deaths of good men had terrorized Sarah, and Emma had served as the operational arm of a conspiracy that had betrayed everything the uniform represented. But justice sometimes required compromise. Sometimes you had to let the small fish swim to catch the shark. When do we move on Cross? Tomorrow morning. The senator is scheduled to attend a board meeting at Chen Technologies. We'll have tactical teams positioned at every exit. When Cross enters the building, we seal it. Jack's phone buzzed. Colonel Hayes. Jack, we have a situation. The old man's voice carried urgency that made Jack's spine stiffen. Our surveillance picked up chatter 30 minutes ago. Kozlov knows about the planned arrest. He's mobilizing. Mobilizing how? 12 contractors, military hardware, tactical vehicles. They left a staging area in Vancouver an hour ago, heading south toward Portland. Hayes paused and the silence carried weight. Jack, there's something else. 20 minutes ago, we lost contact with the safe house where Emma was being held. Ice crystallized in Jack's veins. What do you mean, lost contact? The agents guarding her aren't responding to check-ins. Security cameras went dark. We're sending a team now, but they're 15 minutes out. Jack was already moving, phone pressed to his ear, feet carrying him toward the room where Emma should have been safe. Sarah saw his expression and followed without question, her own fear rising to match his. The door to Emma's room stood open. The child psychologist lay unconscious against the wall, blood trickling from a wound on her temple. 2 FBI agents were zip-tied and gagged in the corner alive, but incapacitated, their eyes wide with the shame of professionals who had failed their primary mission. Emma was gone. The window showed signs of forced entry from outside. Professional work, quick and clean, the kind of extraction that Kozlov had perfected during his years with the agency. Sarah's scream tore through the corridor, a sound of maternal anguish that made hardened agents flinch. Emma, Emma! Jack caught her before she could collapse, holding her upright through sheer force of will. Listen to me. His voice cut through her hysteria with surgical precision. Kozlov took her. That means she's alive. She's leverage. He won't hurt her until he gets what he wants. What does he want? Me, you, the evidence. Senator Cross's freedom. Jack's mind raced through possibilities, discarding options as quickly as they formed. He's going to use Emma to force us to back off, to destroy the case before it can bring Cross down. Foster arrived, surveying the damage with grim efficiency. How did they get in? This building has federal security protocols that should have. Kozlov was CIA for 20 years. He knows every federal security protocol ever written. He knows the blind spots, the shift changes, the communication gaps. Jack released Sarah, turning to face the agent. He's not trying to hide. He wants us to know he has her. He wants us desperate in making mistakes. As if on cue, Jack's phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He answered. Hello, Marine. Kozlov's voice, undistorted this time, carrying the calm confidence of a man holding all the cards. I believe I have something you want. If you hurt her. Threats are pointless between professionals. You know that. Here's what's going to happen. You and Mrs. Chen will come to me. Alone. You'll bring the USB drive and all copies of the evidence. In exchange, the girl goes free. And if I refuse, then pieces of her start arriving at Mrs. Chen's office. Children have 10 fingers. That gives you 10 chances to reconsider before I move on to more essential anatomy. Sarah made a strangled sound. Jack gripped the phone harder. Where, babe? There's an abandoned warehouse on Industrial Avenue. Used to be a shipping facility before the economy decided Portland didn't need manufacturing anymore. 3-story steel beams, shattered skylights. Very atmospheric. Kozlov's tone carried dark amusement. You have 2 hours. Come armed if you like. It won't change anything. But come alone. If I see federal vehicles, helicopters, or anyone who looks like law enforcement, The girl dies immediately. I'll know. I have eyes everywhere. How do I know Emma is still alive? A pause, then a small voice trembling with fear. Uncle Jack. Emma, are you okay? Did they hurt you? I'm scared. The man says, Kozlov's voice returned, cutting off the connection. 2 hours, Reeves. Don't be late. The line went dead. Jack looked at Foster, then at Sarah, whose face had gone pale as winter snow. You can't go. Foster's voice carried command. This is obviously a trap. Kozlov will kill all three of you the moment he has what he wants. If I don't go, he kills Emma. We can mobilize tactical teams, surround the building, wait for an opportunity. You heard him. He sees anything that looks like law enforcement, she dies. Kozlov doesn't bluff. He's not a criminal trying to negotiate. He's a professional who's already calculated every possible outcome. Jack's jaw tightened. The only scenario where Emma survives is one where I go in alone and change the equation. Sarah grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his flesh. I'm coming with you. Sarah, she's my daughter, my responsibility. I brought this danger to all of us by investigating Victor. I won't hide while you risk your life for my family. Jack studied her face, weighing capability against liability. She was terrified, desperate, operating on reserves that had to be nearly depleted. But beneath the fear, he saw something that couldn't be manufactured. Determination that wouldn't bend. The same fire that had driven Michael Chen to investigate Prometheus despite the danger. Some qualities bred true. If you come, you follow my orders without question. When I say move, you move. When I say hide, you hide. When I say run, you run and don't look back. No exceptions. Understood. Foster stepped forward. I can't officially sanction this, but I can give you a 2-hour window before I'm legally obligated to respond. After that, tactical teams move in regardless of the consequences. She pressed a small device into Jack's hand. Panic button, press it, and we'll have helicopters overhead in 4 minutes. It won't help Emma, but it might help you. Understood. Jack collected his weapon, the Colt 1911 that Mrs. Patterson had provided its weight, settling against his ribs like a handshake from an old friend. He checked the magazine, verified the chamber, calculated how many rounds he had available. 8 in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. 9 shots against an unknown number of hostile contractors. Not enough. Never enough. But he had faced worse odds in places where the only options were victory or death. The drive to Industrial Avenue took 23 minutes through Portland's evening traffic. Jack used the time to center himself, to push emotion into the background, where it couldn't interfere with tactical thinking. Sarah sat beside him in silence, her hands wrapped around the backup weapon he'd provided her, breathing carefully controlled. Whatever happens in there, Jack said, without taking his eyes off the road. Remember that Emma needs her mother. If things go wrong, if I tell you to run, you run. You get out, you find Foster, you let the FBI handle what's left. Jack, promise me. Sarah swallowed hard. I promise. The warehouse rose against the Portland skyline like a monument to economic decay, 3 stories of rusting steel and broken dreams. The kind of place where violence could happen without witnesses, where screams would echo off concrete walls and reach no one who cared. Jack parked the vehicle a quarter-mile out, killing the lights and engine in a pull-out screened by overgrown vegetation. The building matched the cold open that had started this story. The description burned into his memory from the moment Kozlov had chosen this location. Steel beams, shattered skylights, moonlight cutting through darkness. The arena where everything would be decided. Stay here until I clear the external perimeter. He handed Sarah a radio. If you hear sustained gunfire and I don't check in, within 5 minutes you leave. Drive to Foster. Tell her everything. And abandon you. If I'm not checking in after 5 minutes of gunfire, I'm already dead. Your job then is to survive and make sure Emma's sacrifice means something. Jack met her eyes in the darkness. But that's not going to happen. I'm going to get your daughter back. That's a promise I intend to keep. He slipped from the vehicle and melted into the darkness, becoming one with the shadows the way he'd learned in jungles and deserts and mountains where the wrong footfall meant death. The warehouse's exterior showed signs of recent activity, fresh tire tracks in the mud, cigarette butts that hadn't weathered, a generator humming somewhere inside providing power to a building that should have been dead. Two vehicles parked near the loading dock, tactical SUVs with government plates that had probably been stolen from a federal motor pool. Jack circled the perimeter counting guards. Three external walking patterns that suggested professional training, but not elite skill. They checked their phones too often, smoked during duty, let their attention wander to the mundane concerns of men who didn't truly believe danger would find them here. The first guard never heard him coming. Jack approached from downwind, moving between rusted shipping containers with the patience of a hunting cat. The man stood at the northwest corner of the property, attention focused on a text message that would never be finished. 3 seconds of exposure. Jack covered the distance in two, arm around the throat, pressure on the carotid arteries precise and controlled. The guard went limp without making a sound, unconscious before his phone hit the ground. Jack lowered him, gently secured his wrists with zip ties from his pocket, removed the radio and sidearm. One down. The second guard was more alert, walking his circuit with the purposeful stride of someone who took his job seriously. Jack watched him complete one full loop, timing the intervals, identifying the blind spots where landscaping and architecture created pockets of opportunity. He struck during the guard's turn at the eastern corner, when momentum and direction change created a natural moment of vulnerability. A blow to the back of the knee buckled the leg. A palm strike to the temple as the guard fell completed the work. Silent, efficient, the kind of violence that left no time for screaming. Two down. The third guard heard something, his hand moving toward the weapon at his hip, his head turning toward where his colleague had been standing moments before. Jack closed the distance before the motion could complete, before the shout could form, before the alarm could sound. He trapped the wrist, twisted with leverage perfected through 15 years of combat. The pistol clattered to concrete. An elbow to the solar plexus drove the air from the guard's lungs. A knee to the face as he doubled over ended consciousness. Three down, 12 seconds total. Jack retrieved the fallen weapons, press-checked each one by habit, then keyed his radio. External perimeter clear, moving to breach point. Sarah's voice crackled back, tight with fear. Be careful, please. Always. The warehouse's rear entrance featured a rusted door that should have been locked. Jack tested it, found it yielding easily, understood the trap for what it was. Kozlov wanted him inside. Wanted this confrontation on ground he had chosen and prepared. Some battles couldn't be avoided. Only one. Jack eased through the door, sliding into darkness that smelled of oil and decay and old violence. The space stretched vast and empty before him, moonlight cutting through shattered skylights in pale ribbons, steel beams casting shadows that moved with the wind. The architecture of abandonment, repurposed for murder. Emma sat in a metal chair at the center of the floor, wrists bound to the armrests, mouth gagged with cloth, eyes wide with terror that no 7-year-old should ever know. She made a muffled sound when she saw Jack struggling against her restraints with desperate energy. 4 guards surrounded her in tactical formation, weapons ready, spacing professional. Between them and Jack stood Raymond Kozlov, emerging from the shadows like a specter given human form. Tall, broad-shouldered, silver hair gleaming in the moonlight, eyes the color of winter steel. Jack Reeves, the fixer's voice echoed through the cavernous space. Punctual as always. The Marine Corps instilled excellent habits. Let the girl go, Kozlov. This is between us. Is it? I thought it was about Senator Cross and the evidence that could destroy his empire. Kozlov spread his hands, revealing that he carried no visible weapon. Where's Mrs. Chen? I specifically requested her presence. She's outside. She'll come in when I know Emma is safe. Reasonable, but ultimately unnecessary. Kozlov gestured, and one of the guards moved toward Emma, cutting her bonds, pulling her roughly to her feet. The girl can leave, walk right out that door, and find her mother waiting in whatever vehicle you arrived in. I have no particular interest in harming children. Jack's instincts screamed warning. Too easy, too accommodating. What's the catch? No catch. I need Mrs. Chen the USB drive, and your guarantee that the evidence disappears permanently. The child is merely a delivery mechanism to ensure compliance. Kozlov's smile held no warmth. Send her out. Then we can discuss terms like civilized professionals. Emma stumbled toward Jack, tears streaming down her face, her small body shaking with fear and relief and confusion. He caught her, steadied her, felt her trembling against his chest like a wounded bird. Go to your mom. He pointed toward the door where moonlight beckoned. Run as fast as you can. Don't look back. Emma hesitated, searching his face for reassurance that he couldn't honestly provide. What about you? I'll be right behind you, I promise. The girl nodded, gathering courage from somewhere deep inside herself, and ran. Her footsteps echoed through the warehouse, growing fainter until she disappeared through the door and into the night. Jack keyed his radio. Emma's coming out. Get her to the vehicle and leave immediately. Sarah's response came choked with relief. I have her. She's okay. Jack, thank God she's okay. Get in the car. Drive to Foster. Don't stop for anything. But you, that's an order, Sarah. Go. Static, then the sound of an engine starting, then nothing. Jack turned back to Kozlov, who had watched the exchange with the patient amusement of a cat observing mice. Noble, sending away your leverage before negotiations even begin. Kozlov shook his head slowly, but tactically foolish. Now you have nothing to bargain with except your own life, which we both know you value less than you should. I never came here to bargain. Then why to arrest me? You're not law enforcement. To kill me, four armed professionals against one aging Marine, admirable odds for storytelling, but poor mathematics for survival. Jack let the mask slip, revealing the warrior beneath. The cold, calculated killer that 15 years of special operations had forged from raw human material. Because you helped murder my friends. Because you've spent 5 years protecting the man who ordered their deaths. Because there's a debt outstanding and I'm here to balance the ledger. Kozlov's expression shifted, a flicker of something that might have been respect passing behind his eyes. Michael Chen, the mission at Coruscant. I remember it well. He began to pace slowly, circling Jack like a predator evaluating prey. Your friend was going to expose everything. The network, the payments, the political connections. Senator Cross couldn't allow that. The information Chen had gathered would have destroyed careers, ended dynasties, sent very powerful people to very unpleasant prisons. So you killed him. So I arranged for him to die in service to his country alongside colleagues who would never be able to contradict the official narrative. Kozlov stopped pacing, facing Jack directly. It was clean, professional, the kind of work I take pride in. The casual admission of murder struck Jack like a physical blow. 5 years of wondering, of nightmares of guilt that had poisoned every waking moment. And here stood the architect of that suffering, discussing it like a business transaction. You're going to pay for that? Perhaps, but not tonight. Kozlov's hand moved in a subtle gesture, and his 4 guards raised their weapons. Tonight you're going to die in a warehouse while attempting to interfere with national security and operations. Another tragic veteran who couldn't adjust to civilian life. The media will speculate about PTSD. There might even be a small memorial service. Jack assessed the tactical situation in fragments of seconds. 4 weapons aimed at his center mass. No cover within diving distance. Exit blocked by hostile forces. Unwinnable by conventional calculation. But Jack had stopped fighting conventionally a long time ago. He moved, not toward cover, not toward the exit. Directly at the nearest guard, closing distance faster than the man's trigger finger could respond. The guard fired, but Jack was already inside his guard, the bullet screaming past his ear, close enough to feel the heat. Jack's hand found the guard's weapon, twisted, redirected. The next 3 shots went into the ceiling, showering them both with rust and debris. A headbutt shattered the guard's nose. A knee to the groin doubled him over. Jack stripped the weapon and put 2 rounds into the next nearest hostile before the first body hit the ground. 2 down, 4 seconds. The remaining guards adapted, spreading apart, trying to establish crossfire that would pin Jack in a killing zone. But Jack kept moving, using the first guard's body as a momentary shield, rolling behind a support pillar that offered concealment, if not true cover. Bullets sparked off concrete. Jack counted shots, calculated magazines, waited for the pause that would come when someone needed to reload. There. He broke from cover, firing twice, hitting the 3rd guard, center mass. Body armor absorbed the rounds, but the impact staggered him backward. Jack followed up with a shot to the leg, then the head as the guard fell. 3 down. The 4th guard was smarter, more experienced. He'd found solid cover behind a metal shipping container, peeking out only to fire a controlled burst that kept Jack pinned. Jack checked his ammunition, 3 rounds remaining in the stolen weapon. His own 1911 still holstered. Impressive, Kozlov's voice echoed from somewhere in the darkness. But ultimately futile. Reinforcements are 3 minutes out. Even if you kill Rodriguez, you'll never get past what's coming. Jack ignored the words. Distraction tactics. Classic interrogation technique. He focused on the fourth guard's pattern. Peak fire duck. Peak fire duck. Predictable rhythm. Exploitable. Jack waited for the peak, then fired not at the guard but at the overhead lighting fixture. Glass and sparks showered down, and in the moment of distraction, Jack moved. He circled the container from the opposite side, coming up behind the guard, while the man was still processing the unexpected attack. The 1911 cleared leather smoothly, 2 shots to the back before the guard could turn. 4 down. Jack stood in the sudden silence, breathing hard, surrounded by bodies searching the shadows for Kozlov. Very impressive indeed. The fixer emerged from behind a pillar 30 feet away, a pistol now visible in his hand. You've cost me 4 good men. That's going to require paperwork. Drop the weapon. No, I don't think I will. Kozlov raised the pistol, aiming at Jack's chest. You're out of ammunition in that borrowed gun, and I doubt you have more than a few rounds left in your sidearm. Mathematics, Jack. It always comes down to mathematics. Then let's simplify the equation. Jack holstered his 1911 and raised his hands, not in surrender, in challenge. One-on-one, no weapons. The way it should have been from the start. Kozlov studied him with those winter steel eyes, calculating odds, assessing threats. You're serious. You murdered my best friend. You tried to kill his wife and daughter. You've spent 5 years walking free while good men rotted in graves. Jack's voice carried cold finality. I want to feel you break. A bullet is too quick. Something shifted in Kozlov's expression. Professional interest giving way to something more personal. I was CIA's top hand-to-hand instructor for 6 years. I've killed 11 men in close combat. You think aging muscles and old training will be enough? I think we're about to find out. Kozlov set his weapon on the ground with deliberate ceremony. Jack did the same with his 1911. They faced each other across 20 feet of blood-stained concrete, 2 professionals who had spent lifetimes perfecting violence, each recognizing in the other a worthy opponent. Kozlov attacked first, closing distance with speed that belied his age. His technique was CIA textbook, refined through decades of application. Strike combinations designed to overwhelm, to break bones, to end fights quickly and permanently. Jack absorbed the first blow on his forearm, deflected the second, counterstruck with an elbow that opened a cut above Kozlov's eye. They separated, reassessed, engaged again. The fight became a brutal education in applied violence. Kozlov landed hits that cracked ribs and split skin. Jack responded with strikes that dislocated joints and ruptured organs. Neither man gave ground willingly, neither acknowledged pain. A knee to Jack's thigh deadened the muscle, slowing his movement. He compensated, turned the limitation into a feint, caught Kozlov with a palm strike to the throat that made the older man stagger. Blood covered both of them now, their own each other's mixed beyond distinction. The concrete beneath their feet grew slick and treacherous. Kozlov attempted a chokehold, the kind of submission technique that ended fights in seconds when applied correctly. Jack felt his air supply narrowing, his vision beginning to blur at the edges. He drove his thumb into Kozlov's eye socket. The fixer screamed, releasing the hold, stumbling backward, with hands covering his ruined eye. Jack didn't hesitate, couldn't afford mercy. He attacked with everything he had left. Palm strikes, elbows, knees. Each blow carrying 15 years of training and 5 years of grief. Kozlov fought back, even blinded, even broken. CIA training ran deep. But Jack had something Kozlov didn't. A promise that demanded fulfillment regardless of cost. He caught Kozlov's arm during an overextended punch, applied leverage that bent the elbow in directions nature never intended heard, bone cracked beneath his grip. Kozlov's scream echoed off the warehouse walls. Jack released the broken arm and delivered the combinations that ended the fight. Palm strike to the chin, knee to the face as the head snapped forward. A final elbow to the temple that dropped Raymond Kozlov like a marionette whose strings had been severed. The fixer collapsed onto the concrete floor unconscious. Defeated, his reign of terror finally ended. Jack stood over him, breathing in ragged gasps, blood dripping from wounds he was only beginning to feel. Feeling nothing but the cold satisfaction of debts paid. His radio crackled. Foster's voice. Reeves, tactical teams are moving in. What's your status? Kozlov is down. All hostiles neutralized. Jack looked around the warehouse at the bodies scattered across the floor that the moonlight streaming through shattered skylights. Send medical. I'm going to need it. And Emma, Sarah, safe. I sent them to you before the fighting started. They're here. They're asking about you. Foster paused. Jack Senator Cross never made it to the board meeting this morning. We picked him up at his residence 3 hours ago trying to destroy documents. He's in federal custody. Jack closed his eyes, letting the words wash over him like rain after drought. It was over. Finally, completely, irreversibly over. The aftermath unfolded across weeks that felt like years. Senator William Cross was indicted on 17 federal charges, his political allies scrambling to distance themselves from the contamination of his exposure. The trial dominated headlines, revealing depths of corruption that shocked even cynical observers. Victor Harmon testified for the prosecution, his detailed accounts of Prometheus operations filling courtrooms with horror and outrage. He would spend 15 years in federal prison, a reduced sentence that still seemed inadequate for the scope of his crimes. Raymond Kozlov faced separate charges, his ruined eye and broken arm, healing in a prison hospital ward, while lawyers argued over jurisdiction and extradition requests from half a dozen countries where he had committed murders that governments had pretended not to notice. Sarah Chen reclaimed her company, purging the board of Cross loyalists, rebuilding Chen Technologies into the vision her husband had originally conceived. The media painted her as a hero, a widow who had risked everything to expose her father-in-law's treachery. She accepted the praise with grace while privately crediting the man who had made it all possible. Jack returned to his apartment, to the narrow life he had constructed as a barrier against memories too painful to face. But something had shifted in the architecture of his isolation. The walls felt less necessary now, the distance less justified. Alex noticed the change first. "You're different, Dad." The observation came over breakfast, delivered with the matter-of-fact honesty of childhood. "You smile more." Jack considered the statement, finding truth in it that surprised him. "I guess I do." "Is it because of the lady Sarah?" "Partly." Jack set down his coffee, giving his son the attention the question deserved. "Partly because I did something I should have done a long time ago, kept a promise to a friend." Alex nodded with the gravity of someone who understood promises and their importance. "Can I meet her sometime, Sarah and Emma? Would you like that?" "I think so. You talk about them in your sleep sometimes. Good talking, not the scary kind." Jack hadn't known he did that. Another change, another sign that the ice around his heart was finally beginning to melt. "Then yes, you can meet them." The meeting happened 3 weeks later in a park halfway between their neighborhoods. Autumn had painted the tree in shades of gold and crimson, carpeting the ground with leaves that crunched beneath their feet. Emma spotted Jack immediately breaking away from her mother to throw herself into his arms with the uncomplicated affection of a child who had decided someone was safe. "Uncle Jack." He lifted her, feeling her weight against his chest, marveling at how natural it felt to hold a child who wasn't his own, but had somehow become his responsibility. Sarah approached more slowly, her eyes finding his across the distance, carrying words that needed no voicing. "Thank you" seems inadequate. Her voice carried the texture of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. "For what you did, what you risked, everything. I was keeping a promise. You were doing more than that." She stopped, facing him directly. "You were being the man Michael always said you were, the best person he ever served with." The children raced toward the playground, their competitive energy transforming into immediate friendship, leaving the adults alone with the weight of everything unspoken between them. Sarah fell into step beside Jack as they followed at a slower pace. "I'm not ready for anything serious." Her honesty carried no apology. "Emma needs stability. I need to rebuild my company, my life, everything Cross tried to destroy. But I'd like to find out what this could become, if you're willing to be patient." Jack took her hand, feeling the warmth of human contact, the promise of connection that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. "I've spent 15 years learning patience in places where impatience got people killed. I think I can manage a little more." She laughed, the sound bright and unexpected, carrying the promise of healing that neither of them had dared to imagine. That evening, after Sarah and Emma had gone home with promises of return visits and shared meals, Jack sat in his apartment with Alex curled against his side. His phone buzzed. Colonel Hayes. Jack, we need to talk. I thought we were finished. Cross is in custody. Prometheus is dismantled. Prometheus was one head of a hydra. We've been getting intelligence from Kozlov's interrogation. There's another network, bigger, better hidden. The people Cross worked with the ones who were truly running operations. Jack felt the familiar weight settling onto his shoulders again. Some wars didn't end. They just paused for breath. What are you telling me? I'm telling you that you've made enemies. Powerful ones. They know who exposed Prometheus. They know about your son, about Sarah and Emma. Hayes paused. There's a mission being planned, voluntary, off the books, to identify and neutralize the remaining network before they can retaliate. You're asking me to come back. I'm giving you a choice. Stay in Portland, build the life you've started to create, and hope they never come for you. Or help us finish what Michael Chen started once and for all. Jack looked at Alex sleeping peacefully against his shoulder, unaware of the dangers that lurked beyond the walls his father had tried to build. He thought of Sarah and Emma, of the promises he had made, and the promises he still might need to make. He thought of Michael bleeding out in the Afghan sand, asking for protection that Jack had finally provided. When do you need an answer? Take the time you need, but Jack, whatever you decide, know that what you've already done matters. Michael would be proud. I'm proud. The line went dead. Jack set the phone down and pulled his son closer, feeling the steady rhythm of the boy's heartbeat against his ribs. Outside, Portland settled into night streetlights flickering to life, the city carrying on with its million small dramas and quiet hopes. Inside, a man who had been a warrior, then a ghost, then a father, contemplated a future that refused to resolve into simple choices. Tomorrow would bring its own decisions, its own dangers, its own demands on a soul that had already given so much. But tonight, his son was safe. The woman he was learning to love was rebuilding her life. A little girl who had lost her father had found someone willing to keep the promises that death had interrupted. Tonight, that was enough. It had to be.